Book summary of 1984 by George Orwell. Winston Smith works as a clerk in London, the chief city of Airstrip 1 in the provinces of Oceania. The dystopian nation where Winston lives is ruled by the Party, a totalitarian regime whose key phrases include war is peace, freedom is slavery and ignorance is strength. The face of Big Brother, the party's figurehead, graces posters on every wall and street corner. The signage warns, Big Brother is watching. Inside every home and workplace, telescreens monitor individuals to ensure their behaviors, facial expressions and even dreams show no indication of dissension. Children are urged to spy on their parents and turn them in for any action that might indicate party disloyalty. The party has created its own language, newspeak, that is constantly evolving to eliminate words that don't promote their orthodoxy. They also preach doublethink, where people must believe two opposing thoughts at once if the party requires it. Ultimately, the party seeks to control reality, believing whoever controls the past controls the future, and whoever controls the present controls the past. Government offices, like the one in which Winston works, ensure that any unsavory information about the past is wiped out and rewritten in all publications. The old information is then destroyed as though it never existed. One moment, party members believe they are at war with the nation of Eurasia. A moment later, they're told they've always been at war with East Asia, and they are compelled to believe it. Individuals caught rebelling against the party vanish and are written out of history, becoming unpersons. Winston, unconvinced that the party is right, begins to rebel in subtle ways. He starts an affair with a co-worker named Julia. He also seeks out a man in his office named O'Brien, whom he believes to be working for the rogue anti-party group, the Brotherhood. O'Brien gives Winston a book that explains the party's tactics. The book talks about the importance of three people classes, in Oceania's case, the inner party, the outer party and commoners called proles, and the power struggles between nations that are necessary for keeping these classes intact. Shortly after Winston has read the book, he and Julia are arrested at their love nest. O'Brien, an operative for the party, turns them in. He is also Winston's chief persecutor over the time he spends in prison. Winston is starved, beaten and physically tortured. Worse than that, however, is the mental anguish inflicted to convince him Big Brother and the party are right. O'Brien explains that the martyrs of old died clutching their beliefs, but that the party would not allow anyone to die unconverted. In session after session, O'Brien tries to convince Winston that reality exists only in his own mind. If Winston tries hard enough, he can make himself believe what the party preaches. Winston is finally sent to room 101, where each prisoner meets his deepest fear. Winston's is rats. When faced with the prospect of being eaten alive by them, he betrays Julia and begs O'Brien to torture her instead of him. Eventually, Winston is completely brainwashed into loving Big Brother and sent back into the world where the party finds him completely harmless. He encounters Julia once more. They confess their betrayals and no longer have any interest in one another. Christian beliefs. The narrator says the proles would be allowed to practice religion if they had shown any signs of wanting or needing it. A man is imprisoned partly because he allowed the word God to remain at the end of a Kipling poem he was revising for the party. O'Brien's book likens the party to the Catholic Church in that one does not achieve membership by inheritance but by opting in. Other belief systems. A woman in Winston's office cries out that Big Brother is her savior. Winston tells O'Brien that the world was uninhabited for millions of years. O'Brien objects, saying it is only as old as we are. O'Brien says people could control the laws of nature, such as gravity, if they tried hard enough. He believes power can only be truly asserted when it is done through pain and humiliation. He says God is power, and party leaders control life, so they are the priests of power. Only in a group setting is power found, he believes, and individuals are infinitely malleable. Winston says he doesn't believe in God but believes there is something deeper in man, perhaps man's spirit, They will defeat evil. Authority rules. The inner party consists of the elite party members, those who rule and are allowed life's luxuries. They go to great lengths, including maintaining a constant state of war, to ensure they remain in power. Big Brother is the party's figurehead, always watching the actions of party members. O'Brien will not tell Winston whether Big Brother is a real person, only that he will never die. O'Brien tricks Winston into thinking he, O'Brien, is a dissenter, then betrays Winston. O'Brien shows occasional tenderness in the midst of torturing Winston. He exudes a sense of wisdom and confidence in his beliefs about the party that intimidates Winston. Profanity, violence. The word "den" appears half a dozen times. A woman in prison calls someone the F word along with "betard." The party urges its members to develop passionate, violent tendencies. It televises bloody events, such as a little boy's arm being blown off. It holds daily and annual hate festivities to stir the masses into frenzies where they desire to kill or injure others. In one such hate moment, Winston fantasizes about tying Julia naked to a stake and shooting her full of arrows before raping her and cutting her throat. Adults and children alike revel in the violence of the party's monthly public hangings. After a bombing, Winston sees a severed hand and kicks it into the gutter. He tells Julia he's sorry he didn't shove his wife off a cliff when he had the opportunity. Winston and Julia tell O'Brien they will do whatever is necessary for the Brotherhood, including distributing addictive drugs, giving others sexually transmitted diseases, throwing sulfuric acid in a child's face, or otherwise killing people. Prisoners, including Winston, are beaten and bloodied until their teeth come out, or are yanked out. Winston is starved and beaten on numerous occasions with fists, boots and steel rods. He often rolls around in his own blood and vomit. As O'Brien prepares to torture Winston with rats, he says the creatures sometimes attack the head and the eyes first and other times burrow through the cheeks and devour the tongue. In terror, Winston begs O'Brien to let the rats steer off Julia's face or strip her flesh to the bones rather than doing it to him. Kissing/sex/homosexuality. The party does not permit its members to marry for love or have sex for pleasure. They look upon sex as a disgusting minor operation and train people this way from childhood. Young party members are urged to join the Anti-Sex League. Party leaders are working on a scientific way to abolish the orgasm altogether. They want that level of excitement and energy reserved for pro-party sentiment. They fear losing control if men and women are permitted to form passionate relationships. Winston talks about his wife's rigidity and sexual submission to him so they could produce a child. He details a sexual encounter with an old prostitute. The proles have no restrictions on sex and are even granted divorces. The party produces pornographic, astrological and sensational literature and films for the proles in the pornosque department. Julia worked there for a while, an indication that the party felt she had good character. Winston dreams of Julia flinging off her clothes. Later, they begin a secret love affair. She confesses she's had many and tells him she wants nothing to do with purity, virtue or goodness, but wants to be corrupt. For both, the affair is as much about rebellion against the party as it is about sex and relationship. He comments on her breasts and about nakedness in general, and they have sex a number of times. After his capture, Winston wonders if he'll be sent to a prison camp. He's heard they allow homosexuality, prostitution and illicit alcohol use. He confesses, dishonestly, to sexual perversion when he is being tortured. 1984 Major Characters. Winston Smith. Winston is 39, small and frail with fair hair and reddish skin. He wears the blue overalls that are the uniform of the outer party. He has a varicose ulcer above his right ankle. He is dissatisfied with life under the party and wonders what things were like before, when people were free and had human dignity. He thinks deeply about the condition of the world. Winston has a phobic fear of rats. Big Brother, the beloved leader of Oceania and symbol of the party. Big Brother has black hair, a black mustache and piercing eyes that seem to follow you. His face and voice are everywhere on the telescreens, coins, stamps, banners, posters, cigarette packets and book covers. Winston sometimes doubts that Big Brother is a real person. Mr. Charrington, the owner of the pearl junk shop Winston visits. He is an old man, with a mild, friendly face and thick glasses. He has an intellectual air. His hair is almost white but his eyebrows are still black. Later, when Winston is arrested, he sees him with black hair and no glasses, a man of about 35, and he realizes that all along Mr. Charrington was a disguised thought police agent. Julia. When Winston first meets Julia, he doesn't know her name and thinks she is a typical party follower, a mindless, well-behaved robot. She works as a mechanic on a novel writing machine. She has short, thick, dark hair, a freckled face and is 26 years old. Around her waist she wears a red sash, a symbol of the Junior Anti-Sex League. Later Winston discovers that Julia merely participates in the Anti-Sex League and other community activities as a cover and that she, too, hates the party. She is intelligent and less likely to be fooled by party propaganda than even Winston, but she is more interested in evading authority and having a good time than trying to overthrow the government. Julia is a highly sexual person. Winston's mother, she was tall, silent and moved slowly. She had magnificent, fair hair. She disappeared when Winston was about 10 or 11 years old. Winston finds it tragic that she loved him and died loving him when he was too young and selfish to love her in return. O'Brien has a very important, mysterious job. He is a large, well-built man with a coarse, humorous, brutal face. He wears spectacles. Winston has always hoped that O'Brien may be an ally and also against Big Brother. As it turns out, he has been toying with Winston and is in charge of his torture and reintegration in the Ministry of Love. The two of them do have a special kind of empathy, although O'Brien can also be very cruel and is determined to force Winston to conform. "Do you remember writing in your diary," he said, "that it did not matter whether I was a friend or an enemy, since I was at least a person who understood you and could be talked to?" You were right. I enjoy talking to you. Your mind appeals to me. It resembles my own mind except that you happen to be insane. Part 3, Chapter 2, pg. 271. Mr. Parsons. Parsons is not only Winston's neighbor but also works with him in the Ministry of Truth. Parsons is fattish but active. He is stupid, and incredibly enthusiastic about all political and community activities. He sweats a lot. He always smells of sweat and leaves damp patches on the handles of the table tennis rackets at the community center. Winston thinks of him as one of those completely unquestioning, devoted drudges on whom, more even than on the thought police, the stability of the party depended. Even in the cells of the Ministry of Love, Parsons is loyal to the party and glad to be arrested. Minor characters. Ampleforth, a poet who works with Winston in the Ministry of Truth. He is quite fond of Winston in his own way. Working on a definitive edition of the works of Kipling, he allows the word God to remain at the end of a line because he cannot find another suitable rhyme, and he is taken to the Ministry of Love. Winston's father, he was dark and thin, wore spectacles and dressed neatly. Winston especially remembers that the soles of his shoes were very thin. Goldstein, the leader of the mysterious Brotherhood, and the enemy of the party, he was one of the original leaders of the revolution. But Big Brother later exposed him as a traitor and forced him into exile. Jones, Aronson and Rutherford, among the last survivors of the original leaders of the revolution who are all, except for Big Brother, exposed as traitors and counter-revolutionaries or wiped out. Like all party enemies, they were arrested and then released for a while after they confessed, but eventually killed by the thought police. After their release, Winston saw them in the Chestnut Tree Cafe. They were silent and unmoving, and Aronson and Rutherford had broken noses. He saw Rutherford's eyes fill with tears. Catherine, Winston's wife. They parted nearly 11 years ago and he hardly ever thinks of her. She was tall and fair-haired with strong facial features. She was very politically orthodox and not at all intelligent. She had not a thought in her head that was not a slogan, and there was no imbecility, absolutely none, that she was not capable of swallowing if the party handed it out to her. Part 1, Chapter 6, pg. 67. Catherine hated sex, but insisted that she and Winston should try to have children for the party. Martin, O'Brien's mysterious servant. A small, dark-haired man in a white jacket, with a totally expressionless, yellow face which might be Asian. O'Brien reveals that he is one of the Brotherhood. It seems to Winston that Martin's whole life is playing a part. O'Brien tells them that sometimes the organization finds it necessary to alter someone's appearance, and Winston wonders whether Martin has a synthetic face, if this is why he shows no expression. Comrade Ogilvy, a character Winston makes up. He is the perfect Oceanian citizen and even as a child had spent all his time supporting the party. As an adult, he had designed a highly effective hand grenade and then died in action at the age of 23 protecting important dispatches. He didn't drink or smoke, was completely celibate and never discussed anything but the party philosophy. Ingzok. Comrade Ogilvy, who had never existed in the present, now existed in the past, and when once the act of forgery was forgotten, he would exist just as authentically, and upon the same evidence, as Charlemagne or Julius Caesar. Part 1, Chapter 4, pg. 50. Mrs. Parsons, Mr. Parsons' wife. She is about 30, but looks older. She has dust in the creases of her face and her hair is wispy. She looks crushed and afraid. The skull-faced man, one of Winston's fellow prisoners in the Ministry of Love. He looks ordinary and mean. He might have been an engineer or technician. He radiates murderous, unappeasable hatred. His face is so emaciated that it looks like a skull, and he is obviously starving to death. When the guards come to take him to room 101, he hysterically begs them not to take him. He starts to scream and says he will do anything rather than go there, offers to confess to anything, tells them to shoot him, tells them to cut the throats of his wife and 3 small children in front of him, but begs them not to take him to room 101. Syme, one of Winston's co-workers, a newspeak specialist who is working on the 11th edition of the official dictionary. He is politically orthodox and a hard worker, but, Winston thinks, he is too intelligent. Sooner or later he will get vaporized. 1984 Objects, Places. Airstrip 1, the territory that used to be known as Britain. The alcove. Winston's plan of keeping a diary is partly suggested by the fact that the tally screen in his living room is unusually placed. There is a shallow alcove in the wall next to the screen which is out of sight. The alcove was probably intended to hold bookshelves, but Winston puts a table there and uses it as a private place to write in. In the alcove he can be heard, but not seen, by someone watching him through the telescreen. The book that contains all the truth against the party and Big Brother. Goldstein wrote it. The book is highly illegal. Copies are produced by the Brotherhood, and continually sought out and destroyed by the thought police. The title, as Winston discovers when he finally gets hold of a copy, is The Theory and Practice of Oligarchical Collectivism. The Brotherhood, a secret organization, led by Emmanuel Goldstein, which is dedicated to overthrowing the party government. O'Brien tells Winston and Julia that no one knows how large the Brotherhood is or who the members are. No single member ever meets more than 3 or 4 contacts at a time, so that they can never betray more than a handful of people. When members are finally caught, they get no help. If it is vital to silence someone, a razor blade may be smuggled into their cell so that they can kill themselves before being questioned. The Chestnut Tree Cafe, haunt of painters and musicians, the place seems ill-omened and slightly disreputable. It is associated with those out of favor with the party, the old leaders of the party, before they were exposed as traitors and purged, used to gather there. The specialty of the house is gin flavored with cloves, Crime stop, stopping short, by instinct, on the threshold of any train of thought that could prove disloyal to the party. Community center, where party members are supposed to go after work for communal recreation, games, lectures and drinking. Party members are not supposed to spend a lot of time alone or have spare time. The diary, where Winston writes his secret thoughts. He uses a real, old-fashioned pen and ink, and writes in a beautiful book with creamy paper, which he found in the junk shop. He puts a special speck of dust on the cover so that he can tell if anyone has found the diary, but does not realize that the thought police actually move and replace the speck of dust so he will not know that he is being watched. Doublethink, the practice of thought control necessary to be a good party disciple. No party member can ever admit that the party might be wrong. However, sometimes reality shows something to the contrary. Through using doublethink, the party member can deal with any problems or inconsistencies with the party. Party members simply block all awareness of the party's falsities from their mind, and then, as another act of doublethink, they forget that they have even used doublethink. East Asia, one of the 3 world superpowers. This superstate that has the least land, but still a large population. It contains China and all of southern and eastern Asia. Eurasia, one of the 3 world superpowers. Its landmass is the whole of the northern part of Asia, and Europe. In the novel, Oceania is first at war with Eurasia and allied with East Asia, but then is at war with East Asia and allied with Eurasia. The glass paperweight, a beautiful antique that Winston finds in the junk shop, a heavy lump of glass, curved on one side and flat on the other, almost like half a sphere. The color and texture of the glass has a softness, like rainwater, and in the center is a piece of pink coral. Winston buys it because of its beauty, but it is a strange thing for a party member to buy, and it would be difficult for him to explain if anyone knew that he had it. It seems to him as if the surface of the glass is like the sky, and inside is a tiny world where Julia's life and his own are fixed, like the coral, in a kind of eternity. The Golden Country, a landscape that recurs in Winston's dreams that he thinks he recognizes in the country area he visits with Julia. There is an old pasture, a field used for grazing animals, with a foot track running across it and a few molehills. Nearby he can hear a stream. Hate Week, a kind of week-long festival involving processions, speeches, films, banners, posters etc., aiming at building hatred of the enemy. Inner Party, the highest level of Oceania society, easily visible because of their black overalls. Regular people like Winston belong to the middle level. The Outer Party, Junior Anti-Sex League, an organization for young people to advocate complete celibacy for both sexes. Their ideal is that all children will be the products of artificial insemination and will grow up in public institutions. Members wear a red sash around the waist. The Junk Shop, Winston finds this shop in a slummy area of town and is fascinated. Although party members are not supposed to go into ordinary shops, he goes in to buy a blank book, which he uses as his secret diary. Winston later returns and meets the owner, Mr. Charrington. He and Julia rent the room above the shop, which has an armchair, a mahogany double bed and an old-fashioned clock with a 12-hour face, as a private place for the two of them. Ministry of Love, in charge of law and order. The Ministry of Love is where political prisoners are tortured. It is hard to get into, surrounded by barbed wire and steel doors, and the surrounding streets are patrolled by guards. Ministry of Peace, in charge of war. Oceania is constantly at war with either Eurasia or Eastasia and alternates which superpower is the friend and which is the enemy at an instant's notice. Ministry of Plenty, in charge of economic affairs and production of goods. The Ministry of Plenty fabricates shortages of everyday items, such as razor blades. Ministry of Truth, like the other ministries, it is housed in a huge wide pyramid-shaped concrete building. It is in charge of creating and rewriting all news, education, entertainment and art. Newspeak, the official language of Oceania. The idea behind Newspeak is to develop a language in which it is technically impossible to disagree with the party because there are no words for unorthodox ideas. Every year the vocabulary of Newspeak becomes smaller and smaller and the language is more simplified. Oceania, the superstate headed by the party and Big Brother. It consists of what used to be called North and South America, the Atlantic Islands including Great Britain, Australasia and the southern part of Africa. Proles, the proletariat, the working class of Oceania. They have much freer lives than party members and the party spends much less time watching and controlling the proles, because they aren't worth the time and effort. The party does not view the proles as a threat to the system. Winston believes that any change in Oceania society would have to come from them. Records Department, the department in the Ministry of Truth which changes all records of the past, from newspapers to poetry, so as to reflect current politics and show the party in the best possible light. The Spies, the party's organization for children. They wear blue shorts, gray shirts and red neckerchiefs. In the Spies, children are taught to hate traitors and thought criminals. They also learn to worship the party and Big Brother but rebel against all discipline except that of the party, so that they become ungovernable little savages and often turn on their parents. Street Clement Stain engraving, screwed onto the wall in the room above the junk shop, a steel engraving of the church, which is an oval building with rectangular windows and a small tower. Mr. Charrington offers to sell it to Winston but it is obviously too big and awkward for him to take home. It later turns out that there was a tally screen behind the engraving, spying on Winston and Julia during their time together. Tally screen, a square metal screen, like a dulled mirror, which works like a television screen except that it not only shows programs, all praising the party, but also allows anyone within its range to be seen and heard by the thought police. Thought crime, the crime of thinking anything that disagrees with Big Brother, the party or the party philosophy. INGZOC, thought police, the specialized, terrifying branch of the police that detects and arrests thought criminals. 2-minute hate, a daily ritual. Everyone assembles in front of the tally screen at 1100 for a 2-minute program that shows Emmanuel Goldstein, the enemy of the people, and marching enemy soldiers. This is a highly emotional moment and it is impossible even for Winston to avoid joining in, a hideous ecstasy of fear and vindictiveness, a desire to kill, to torture, to smash faces in with a sledgehammer, seemed to flow through the whole group of people like an electric current, turning one even against one's will into a grimacing, screaming lunatic. Part 1, Chapter 1, pg. 16, at the end of 2-minute hate, Big Brother's face appears, inspiring everyone with relief and is followed by the 3-party slogans. Vaporizing, enemies of the party are arrested in the middle of the night and completely disappear. Their names are wiped from register and all records of any of their actions are destroyed, so that they are totally abolished, vaporized and have become an unperson, someone who supposedly has never existed. Victory Gin, the alcoholic beverage drunk by outer party members. It is colorless, oily, tastes like nitric acid and has a sickly smell. Drinking it causes an effect like being hit on the back of the head with a rubber club. It is the only product in Oceania that is both cheap and easy to find. Victory Mansions, the apartment building where Wilson lives. It was built in 1930 and is falling apart. Nothing, from the plumbing to the electricity, works right. The hallway smells like boiled cabbage and old rags. 1984 quotes. Quote 1. Big Brother is watching you. Part 1, Chapter 1, page 3. Quote 2. War is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. Part 1, Chapter 1, page 6. Quote 3. A hideous ecstasy of fear and vindictiveness, a desire to kill, to torture, to smash faces in with a sledgehammer, seemed to flow through the whole group of people like an electric current, turning one even against one's will into a grimacing, screaming lunatic. Part 1, Chapter 1, page 16. Quote 4. one of those completely unquestioning, devoted drudges on whom, more even than on the thought police, the stability of the party depended. Part 1, Chapter 2, page 23, quote 5. We shall meet in the place where there is no darkness. Part 1, Chapter 2, page 27, quote 6. The past was dead, the future was unimaginable. Part 1, Chapter 2, page 28, quote 7. With its grace and carelessness it seemed to annihilate a whole culture, a whole system of thought, as though Big Brother and the party and the thought police could all be swept into nothingness by a single splendid movement of the arm. Part 1, Chapter 3, page 33, quote 8. Who controls the past, ran the party slogan, controls the future, who controls the present controls the past. Part 1, Chapter 3, page 37, quote 9. Comrade Ogilvy, who had never existed in the present, now existed in the past, and when once the act of forgery was forgotten, he would exist just as authentically, and upon the same evidence, as Charlemagne or Julius Caesar. Part 1, Chapter 4, page 50, quote 10. Your worst enemy, he reflected, was your own nervous system. At any moment the tension inside you was liable to translate itself into some visible symptom. Part 1, Chapter 6, page 64, quote 11. She had not a thought in her head that was not a slogan, and there was no imbecility, absolutely none, that she was not capable of swallowing if the party handed it out to her. Part 1, Chapter 6, page 67, quote 12. Sexual intercourse was to be looked on as a slightly disgusting minor operation, like having an enema. Part 1, Chapter 6, page 69, quote 13. They were born, they grew up in the gutters, they went to work at 12, they passed through a brief blossoming period of beauty and sexual desire, they married at 20, they were middle-aged at 30, they died, for the most part, at 60. Heavy physical work, the care of home and children, petty quarrels with neighbors, films, football, beer, and, above all, gambling filled up the horizon of their minds. Part 1, Chapter 7, page 71, quote 14. If there is hope, wrote Winston, it lies in the paroles. Part 1, Chapter 7, page 72, quote 15. Until they become conscious they will never rebel, and until after they have rebelled they cannot become conscious. Part 1, Chapter 7, page 74, quote 16. A nation of warriors and fanatics, marching forward in perfect unity, all thinking the same thoughts and shouting the same slogans, perpetually working, fighting, triumphing, persecuting, 300 million people all with the same face. Part 1, Chapter 7, page 77, quote 17. Freedom is the freedom to say that 2 plus 2 make 4. If that is granted, all else follows. Part 1, Chapter 7, page 84, quote 18. It seemed to him that he knew exactly what it felt like to sit in a room like this, in an armchair beside an open fire with your feet in the fender and a kettle on the hob, utterly alone, utterly secure, with nobody watching you, no voice pursuing you, no sound except the singing of the kettle and the friendly ticking of the clock. Part 1, Chapter 8, page 100, quote 19. Oranges and lemons, say the bells of St. Clement's, you owe me 3 farthings, say the bells of St. Martin's. Part 1, Chapter 8, page 103, quote 20. At the sight of the words I love you the desire to stay alive had welled up in him, and the taking of minor risks suddenly seemed stupid. Part 2, Chapter 1, page 110-11, quote 21. By degrees the flood of music drove all speculations out of his mind. It was as though it were a kind of liquid stuff that poured all over him and got mixed up with the sunlight that filtered through the leaves. Part 2, Chapter 2, page 125, quote 22. Not merely the love of one person, but the animal instinct, the simple undifferentiated desire, that was the force that would tear the party to pieces. Part 2, Chapter 2, page 127, Quote 23, to be bought furtively by proletarian youths who were under the impression that they were buying something illegal. Part 2, Chapter 3, page 132. Quote 24, what was more important was that sexual privation induced hysteria, which was desirable because it could be transformed into war fever and leader worship. Part 2, Chapter 3, page 134. Quote 25, she did not understand that there was no such thing as happiness, that the only victory lay in the far future, long after you were dead, that from the moment of declaring war on the party it was better to think of yourself as a corpse. We are the dead, he said. Part 2, Chapter 3, page 137. Quote 26, the smell of her hair, the taste of her mouth, the feeling of her skin seemed to have got inside him, or into the air all around him. She had become a physical necessity. Part 2, Chapter 4, page 140. Quote 27, the paroles, normally apathetic about the war, were being lashed into one of their periodical frenzies of patriotism. Part 2, Chapter 5, page 150. Quote 28, so long as they were actually in this room, they both felt, no harm could come to them. Part 2, Chapter 5, page 152. Quote 29, even the one plan that was practicable, suicide, they had no intention of carrying out. To hang on from day to day and from week to week, spinning out a present that had no future, seemed an unconquerable instinct, just as one's lungs will always draw the next breath so long as there is air available. Part 2, Chapter 5, page 153. Quote 30, she only questioned the teachings of the party when they in some way touched upon her own life. Often she was ready to accept the official mythology, simply because the difference between truth and falsehood did not seem important to her. Part 2, Chapter 5, page 154. Quote 31, he had the sensation of stepping into the dampness of a grave, and it was not much better because he had always known that the grave was there and waiting for him. Part 2, Chapter 6, page 160. Quote 32, he knew that he was starving the other two, but he could not help it, he even felt that he had a right to do it. The clamorous hunger in his belly seemed to justify him. Part 2, Chapter 7, page 163. Quote 33, the terrible thing that the party had done was to persuade you that mere impulses, mere feelings, were of no account, while at the same time robbing you of all power over the material world. Part 2, Chapter 7, page 165. Quote 34, it's the one thing they can't do. They can make you say anything, but they can't make you believe it. They can't get inside you. Part 2, Chapter 7, page 167. Quote 35, you will work for a while, you will be caught, you will confess, and then you will die. There is no possibility that any perceptible change will happen within our own lifetime. We're the dead. Part 2, Chapter 8, page 177. Quote 36, the primary aim of modern warfare. Part 1, in accordance with the principles of doublethink, this aim is simultaneously recognized and not recognized by the directing brains of the inner party, is to use up the products of the machine without raising the general standard of living. Part 2, Chapter 9, page 189. Quote 37, if the machine were used deliberately for that end, hunger, overwork, dirt, illiteracy, and disease could be eliminated within a few generations. Part 2, Chapter 9, page 190. Quote 38, the consciousness of being at war, and therefore in danger, makes the handing over of all power to a small caste seem the natural, unavoidable condition of survival. Part 2, Chapter 9, page 192. Quote 39, a mixture of psychologist and inquisitor, studying with extraordinary minuteness the meaning of facial expressions, gestures and tones of voice, and testing the truth-producing effects of drugs, shock therapy, hypnosis, and physical torture. Part 2, Chapter 9, page 194. Quote 40, It was the product of a mind similar to his own, but enormously more powerful, more systematic, less fear-ridden. The best books, he perceived, are those that tell you what you know already. Part 2, Chapter 9, page 201, quote 41. Even the Catholic Church of the Middle Ages was tolerant by modern standards. Part of the reason for this was that in the past no government had the power to keep its citizens under constant surveillance. The invention of print, however, made it easier to manipulate public opinion, and the film and the radio carried the process further. With the development of television, and the technical advance which made it possible to receive and transmit simultaneously on the same instrument, private life came to an end. Part 2, Chapter 9, page 206-7, quote 42. The essential act of the party is to use conscious deception while retaining the firmness of purpose that goes with complete honesty. Part 2, Chapter 9, page 215, quote 43. Everywhere stood the same solid unconquerable figure, made monstrous by work and childbearing, toiling from birth to death and still singing. Part 2, Chapter 10, page 222, quote 44. It was more natural to exist from moment to moment, accepting another 10 minutes life even with the certainty that there was torture at the end of it. Part 3, Chapter 1, page 232, quote 45. There were times when it went on until the cruel, wicked, unforgivable thing seemed to him not that the guards continued to beat him but that he could not force himself into losing consciousness. Part 3, Chapter 2, page 244, quote 46. The old feeling, that at bottom it did not matter whether O'Brien was a friend or an enemy, had come back. O'Brien was a person who could be talked to. O'Brien had tortured him to the edge of lunacy, and in a little while, it was certain, he would send him to his death. It made no difference. Part 3, Chapter 2, page 255-6, quote 47. There was nothing left in them except sorrow for what they had done, and love of Big Brother. It was touching to see how they loved him. They begged to be shot quickly, so that they could die while their minds were still clean. Part 3, Chapter 2, page 259, quote 48. We control matter because we control the mind. Reality is inside the skull. Part 3, Chapter 3, page 268, quote 49. Do you remember writing in your diary, he said, that it did not matter whether I was a friend or an enemy, since I was at least a person who understood you and could be talked to? You were right. I enjoy talking to you. Your mind appeals to me. It resembles my own mind except that you happen to be insane. Part 3, Chapter 2, page 271, quote 50. It was like swimming against a current that swept you backwards however hard you struggled, and then suddenly deciding to turn round and go with the current instead of opposing it. Nothing had changed except your own attitude. The predestined thing happened in any case. Part 3, Chapter 4, page 280, quote 51. For the first time he perceived that if you want to keep a secret you must also hide it from yourself. Part 3, Chapter 4, page 283, quote 52. Do it to Julia. Do it to Julia. Not me, Julia. I don't care what you do to her. Tear her face off. Strip her to the bones. Not me, Julia. Not me. Part 3, Chapter 5, page 289, quote 53. There were things, your own acts, from which you could not recover. Something was killed in your breast, burnt out, cauterized out. Part 3, Chapter 6, page 293, quote 54, but it was all right, everything was all right, the struggle was finished. He had won the victory over himself. He loved Big Brother. Part 3, Chapter 6, page 300, quote 55, the purpose of Newspeak was not only to provide a medium of expression for the worldview and mental habits proper to the devotees of Ingzak, but to make all other modes of thought impossible. Appendix, page 303.